Welcome, I'm David, and this is Crime Line. Tonight, we unravel a case that has twisted and turned for over 2 decades. A story of a brutal double murder in Topeka, Kansas. A conviction based on circumstantial evidence, an overzealous prosecutor whose actions led to that conviction being overturned, and now, a retrial fraught with new leads and lingering, profound questions. In 2002, Mike Sisko and his fiancée Karen Harkness were found shot to death in their beds. Nearly 10 years later, Mike's ex-wife, Dana Chandler, was convicted of their murders. But was justice truly served? Or did a flawed investigation and prosecutorial misconduct send an innocent woman to prison? This is the complex and still developing story of Dana Chandler and the long shadow of doubt that hangs over the deaths of Mike Sisko and Karen Harkness. Topeka, Kansas, the state capital, was the setting for this protracted tragedy. Mike Sisko and Dana Chandler had been married for 15 years. They had made their home in Topeka and had 2 children together, a daughter, Haley, and a son, Dustin. However, many of those years were reportedly turbulent, with allegations of alcohol abuse casting a significant shadow over the family and their happiness. When they finally decided to call it quits, the divorce was bitter and marked by extended, contentious court battles, primarily over the custody of their children. When the dust finally settled, Mike Sisko had received the family home and primary custody of the kids. Dana Chandler, in turn, was ordered to pay child support, a financial obligation she evidently struggled with. By 2002, she owed approximately $7,000 to Mike in back support payments. Police filings from the period also indicate that both Mike and Dana had engaged in extramarital affairs during their troubled marriage or separation. Little is known publicly about the man with whom Dana was involved. However, Mike had reportedly begun an affair after his separation from Dana with a neighbor of theirs who was also married at the time. This neighbor, whom Mike had been seeing, would later report instances of harassment from Dana Chandler, including a disturbing confrontation at her church while she was there with her own children. The police were called in relation to that incident, but no arrest was made. After the divorce was finalized, Dana Chandler moved around quite a bit. She first relocated to Arizona, then to Lawrence, which is back in Kansas, then to Phoenix, Arizona again, and after that, in December 2001, she was reported to be in San Diego, California. By 2002, she was living in Denver, Colorado, a significant distance, approximately an 8 to 9 hour drive covering 550-600 miles from Mike and her children, who had remained in Topeka, Kansas. In Topeka, in 2002, Mike Sisko, then 47 years old, had been in a serious relationship with Karen Harkness, who was 53 for about 3 to 4 years. Karen was also a divorcee and had 2 adult children from her previous marriage. Chad Harkness and Aaron Sutton, named noted as Aaron in relation to Jeff Sutton later. This could be a daughter. Her relationship with her own ex-husband was reportedly amicable. In fact, he still worked at the family business they had presumably built together. Mike and Karen, despite their commitment, maintained separate homes. This arrangement was primarily so that Mike could continue to independently raise his children. Dustin and Haley. In the family home, Karen, after having raised 2 children of her own, was reportedly not overly keen to take on the role of a full-time stepmother again. So she maintained a pleasant, but not overly close, relationship with Haley and Dustin. Mike and Karen were, however, recently engaged in 2002 and appeared to be very happy together. Brochures found at their residence after their deaths suggested they were excitedly planning a trip together to Jamaica. On the night of Saturday, July 6th, 2002, Mike Sisko and Karen Harkness were out together, enjoying an evening at the Sack and Fox Casino, a Native American gaming establishment located in Powhatan, Kansas. Security tapes from the casino showed them arriving at approximately 6:50 p.m. and then leaving together at about 1:30 a.m. The casino was about a 45-minute drive from Karen's house in Topeka. The next day, Sunday, July 7th, just before 2:00 and party time, Karen's father, Harold, and his wife, Betty, arrived at Karen's house. They were scheduled to meet Karen and Mike for a luncheon date. They found the front door locked, and no one was answering their knocks or calls. Betty, concerned, went around to the side of the house and noticed that a gate was ajar and the back door to the home was not secured. They made their way inside. It was then that they made the horrifying discovery Mike Sisko and Karen Harkness were dead. They had each been shot multiple times, at least 5 times each. They were in bed when the attack occurred and were, by then, cold to the touch. The shootings had likely occurred in the early morning hours, not long after they returned from the casino. The location and nature of some of the wounds, particularly those on Karen Harkness, suggested to investigators that this was an intensely emotional killing, a crime driven by personal rage and anger, with a disturbing element of overkill, more violence than necessary to cause death. An independent consultant examining the case later would conclude that the crime scene strongly suggested the shooter had specific, profound anger issues directed primarily towards Karen. The crime scene was meticulously assessed by the Topeka Police Department, and an investigative assessment report was later published. It noted that the neighborhood where Karen lived was a low-crime area, predominantly upper-middle class. Critically, investigators found no evidence of forced entry into the home. They did discover, however, that the rear door to the home, though appearing locked, could potentially be opened by applying upward force to disengage the lock mechanism, a vulnerability the killer might have known or exploited. Police initially considered the possibility that this could have been a robbery gone wrong. Mike and Karen had won some money at the casino that night, so perhaps this was the motive. However, this initial theory was ruled out quite quickly as more evidence from the crime scene was compiled. The investigation found that nothing of value appeared to have been taken or was missing from the home, which seemed to eliminate robbery as a primary motive. Karen Harkness was still wearing her jewelry, which included a diamond bracelet, a Rolex watch, and a gold ring. Mike Sisko's wallet was found in his shorts. It contained 2 uncashed checks and approximately $950 in cash. There was also additional cash in plain view on a counter near the bed. Karen's purse was found on the kitchen counter. It contained a billfold and $350 in cash. Mike's checkbook was undisturbed on the dining room table. If this was a robbery, investigators concluded it certainly wasn't a very efficient or successful one. Police found 11 spent 9mm shell casings and a number of bullet fragments at the scene. The 9mm handgun used in the killings was never recovered, and no usable fingerprints were found on the empty shell casings. Later, however, a single crucial piece of potential DNA evidence would be found: a lone hair resting on top of one of those casings, a tiny fragment in an otherwise forensically clean scene. After interviewing family members and friends on the day Mike and Karen were found, investigators were almost immediately directed towards Dana Chandler, Mike's ex-wife, as a significant person of interest. Police contacted Dana on her cell phone that same day and were immediately struck by her strangely detached and unemotional response to the news of her ex-husband's violent death. Dana told Detective Volley that she had last spoken to Mike on July 5th, 2 days prior, when she had called, she claimed, to speak with their son, Dustin. However, it was what Dana did not do during this initial phone call that spoke volumes to the seasoned detective. She did not ask any of the questions one might normally expect from an ex-spouse and the mother of the victim's children. Upon hearing such shocking news, she didn't inquire about the circumstances of Mike's death, when or where it had happened, or if the police had arrested anyone. Most disturbingly to investigators, she did not ask after her own children, Haley and Dustin, who had been living with Mike. Indeed, police reported that she made no apparent attempt to reach them that night to check on their well-being or offer comfort. She also initially refused to tell Detective Volley where she was currently working. Then, just 3 days later, Dana Chandler retained an attorney but did agree to a formal interview with police, which took place at her lawyer's office. Dana Chandler, it is thought by investigators and prosecutors, lied her way through this first formal interview about both large and small details. She claimed, for example, that she did not know that her son, Dustin, was away on a canoeing trip that weekend, and that was why she had called the house on July 5th, hoping to speak with him. Dustin, however, would later testify that he had specifically told his mother about his planned canoeing trip only a couple of days prior, during a memorable phone conversation that had escalated into a heated argument. Dustin had told his mother that he could not join her in Denver on July 6th because of his pre-planned church youth group canoeing trip. She had reportedly become enraged, accusing him of choosing his church trip over her, and had screamed at him before he hung up on her. Dana claimed to police that she was in Denver, Colorado. At the time of the shootings in Topeka, she described taking a little road trip over that weekend, which included, she said, an uncharacteristic hike through an unidentified trail, and ended up in Loveland, Colorado, a city north of Denver, near the foothills of the Rocky Mountains. She outlined extensively the number of stores she had supposedly visited in the Denver area on that day, even providing credit card statements as proof of these transactions. Notably, she mentioned purchasing only a cigarette lighter at one particular location. It was later discovered, through more thorough investigation of her financial records, that Dana had, perhaps conveniently, omitted the purchase of 2 5-gallon gas cans that she had bought alongside that single cigarette lighter, a purchase that would later fuel the prosecution's theory that she had used these cans to carry extra fuel for a long, undetected drive from Denver to Topeka and back. At the interview, Dana Chandler was offered an opportunity to take a polygraph test. After consultation with her lawyer, she refused. In an effort to compile more physical evidence, Dana Chandler was arrested in July 2002 on an outstanding child support warrant. Her black Mitsubishi Eclipse was seized and searched extensively by forensic teams. The front seats were removed and examined meticulously. However, no direct physical evidence linking Dana to the murders in Topeka was found in her car. The next month, in a seemingly unrelated development that briefly diverted investigative attention, 2 individuals with extensive criminal records were caught attempting to use a forged check from Mike Sisko's bank account at a local quick shop. While Mike's checkbook had been found at the crime scene, this particular forgery was later determined to be from a different bank account and ultimately deemed unconnected to the homicides themselves. In May 2003, Dana's hair was collected by investigators and compared with the hair and fiber samples recovered from the crime scene, including the single hair found on the shell casing. The samples did not match. Left with no definitive physical evidence to support their strong suspicions against Dana Chandler, the case eventually went cold, and no arrests were made for nearly a decade. The FBI became involved in the stalled investigation only after the case was featured on the CBS television show 48 Hours in 2009. The national exposure from the show sparked a renewed public interest in solving the mystery of who killed Mike Sisko and Karen Harkness, and brought fresh eyes and resources to the investigation. A strong circumstantial case is never as good as a strong scientific case, one investigator noted, highlighting the challenges they faced. They worked it for 2 years after the FBI became involved, and finally decided even though the case had problems, it was time to move. This case is never going to get better than it is right now today. On July 25, 2011, nearly a decade after the deadly double homicide, Dana Chandler was arrested in the parking lot of a fast food restaurant in Oklahoma and charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder for the deaths of Mike Sisko and Karen Harkness. She would later blame the 48 Hours crime show for tainting the media and, by extension, the public against her, claiming they were the first to publicly name her as the prime suspect. A main focus of Dana Chandler's first trial in 2012 was her location at the time of the murders. There was extensive analysis of the convoluted route she supposedly took on her weekend road trip around Colorado and where she actually was during the critical 27-hour period that was largely undocumented by verifiable receipts or witnesses. Receipts and credit card statements did confirm Dana was in Denver at 2 p.m. on Saturday, July 6th. Other receipts also confirmed she was in Loveland, Colorado, north of Denver, around 5 p.m. on Sunday, July 7th. This left a significant gap of about 27 hours during which her whereabouts were largely unaccounted for. Enough time, the prosecution argued, for her to have made the approximately 8 to 9 hour drive from Denver to Topeka, commit the murders, and drive back to Colorado. Dana provided at least 3 different and somewhat conflicting explanations for where she was during this critical time. During her July 2002 interview with Detective Volley, Dana said she left her house in Denver and drove through the mountains on Interstate 70, traveling west towards Dillon, Colorado. She said she hiked near Granby and then took Highway 34 to Estes Park, a route that would have necessarily taken her through or near Rocky Mountain National Park. However, at the entrance to the park, visitors are required to pay an admission fee for cars to enter, and they would also likely be recorded on video as they approach the gate and the exit. The park's recordings from July 7th, 2002 did not show Dana Chandler's car entering or exiting the park. In a separate version of events she told in July 2002 to an acquaintance, Dana claimed she was in Denver all weekend. Then, in August 2002 to another acquaintance, she reportedly said that she had lied to police about her true whereabouts because she did not think they would believe her actual story. She then claimed she had bought gas and driven to Glenwood Springs, then to Craig, then to Steamboat Springs, towards Fort Collins, and then finally back to Denver. This acquaintance astutely asked if she had seen any smoke from the massive forest fires he recalled seeing on television news reports from that weekend in Colorado. Dana reportedly said no, she hadn't seen any smoke. The critical thing is, that particular weekend in July 2002, the state of Colorado was experiencing one of its worst forest fire seasons on record. The massive Hayman Fire, southwest of Denver, was still burning, and the coal seam fire near Glenwood Springs, a location on Dana's alleged alibi route, was also active. It would have been incredibly hard, if not impossible, for anyone driving extensively through those mountainous regions of Colorado that weekend to have missed seeing or smelling the pervasive smoke from these major wildfires. Dana Chandler was convicted in 2012 on what was largely limited circumstantial evidence. The key elements of the prosecution's case were first, her inconsistent and often contradictory statements in interviews about her whereabouts over that crucial weekend. Second, her suspicious gas purchases, particularly the omission of the purchase of the 2 5-gallon gas cans on July 6th, which suggested to police that she had used these containers to carry extra fuel in order to make the long trip from Denver to Topeka and back with limited, or perhaps no, stops along the way, thus allowing her to travel largely undetected. And third, and perhaps most compellingly for the jury, her well-documented history of reported stalking and harassment of her ex-husband Mike Sisko and his new partner, Karen Harkness. Several witnesses, including Dana's own children, Haley and Dustin, testified about Dana's obsessive behavior towards Mike and Karen. Dustin testified that he once found his mother snooping through Mike's paperwork in the kitchen when she came to pick him up, even though he expected her to wait outside. He also said his mother had made him and his sister Haley spy on their dad in 1999 or 2000 by sitting in the car outside Mike's home for extended periods. And once, after Mike and Karen had started dating, Dana reportedly drove all the way from Lawrence, Kansas, to Karen's home in Topeka during a scheduled visitation with her children, parked outside Karen's house, and simply waited there for an hour or two, watching. Confirmation of other stalking and harassing behavior was abundant from multiple sources. Mike's sister, Kathy Boots, testified that Mike had told them he returned home one day in May 2002 to find Dana sitting inside his breezeway, and that Dana had told Mike they should get back together and live together again as a family. In one particularly bizarre and unsettling story, Kathy Boots reported that Mike and Karen had allegedly heard Dana outside on their trampoline in the middle of the night, just jumping up and down and laughing eerily in the darkness. Kathy also believed that Dana had first learned of Mike and Karen's engagement during a phone conversation when Mike was rejecting Dana's idea that they reunite as a family. These disturbing stories, compiled from multiple people close to the family, represented the strongest evidence suggesting Dana Chandler had a motive: jealousy, rage, obsession for the murders. This was further supported by notes found in Mike Sisko's own journal, in which he had recorded instances of encountering Dana when she was apparently following and watching him. So, how did this seemingly solid circumstantial case go from a conviction with 2 consecutive life sentences to a complete reversal by the Kansas Supreme Court? The simple answer, and a shocking one, is severe prosecutorial misconduct on the part of the lead prosecutor, Jacqueline Spradling, who, the court found, felt the pressure of a high-profile, decade-old cold case that also critically lacked the definitive forensic evidence one would usually need to bring such serious charges across the line to a conviction. Spradling herself was later quoted as saying, "I knew that she had killed Mike and Karen, and I did not know that we'd be able to prove it. We didn't have fingerprints. We didn't have DNA." In terms of forensic science, during the 2012 trial, Jacqueline Spradling went further than just stating that Dana was a stalker. She made the highly prejudicial claim to the jury that Dana was also formally ruled by a judge prior to the murders to be dangerous. Spradling effectively manifested a non-existent legal protective order that she claimed Mike Sisko had taken out against Dana, an order supposedly signed and confirmed by a judge. She told the jury at trial that such an order existed, presenting it as evidence that Dana was not just off balance about the relationship and behaving erratically, but that she was also a legally recognized threat. No such protective order, however, actually existed. In addition, Spradling claimed to the jury that Dana's motive for the murders was prompted or arranged specifically on that fatal weekend because she had only just learned of Mike and Karen's engagement, implying a crime of sudden, jealous passion. There was no credible evidence to support this claim either. Other testimony suggested Dana was likely aware of the engagement long before that weekend. Dana herself, in a statement made at her sentencing hearing, vehemently denied that she knew Mike and Karen were engaged prior to their murder, further denied that she wanted to get back together with Mike, and most importantly, categorically denied that she had murdered either Mike Sisko or Karen Harkness, stating, "I am innocent. I did not murder Mike or Karen." Jacqueline Spradling was later disbarred for her misconduct in this and other cases. Dana Chandler's conviction was thrown out by the Kansas Supreme Court in April 2018. But that is not the end of the story. Shawnee County, Kansas, scheduled a retrial for Dana Chandler for August 2022. This time, Dana has far more support. She is being backed by the Miracle of Innocence Project, a non-profit organization that seeks justice and comprehensive care for the innocent and wrongfully convicted. Why would such an organization support Dana's legal fund if she was clearly guilty? The answer may lie in new evidence, or re-examinations of old evidence that has since come to light. For example, Topeka police had originally checked with gas stations and convenience stores along Interstate 70 to try and disprove Dana's alibi by tracking her on their suspected route from Denver to Topeka through Nebraska. But they found that back in 2002, none of the stores along that route had any usable surveillance cameras. One clerk, however, reportedly said she was 70% sure that she had seen Dana and could identify her car. That clerk, unfortunately, passed away in 2006 and thus would never be able to testify formally at trial. The final piece of circumstantial evidence used by the prosecution in Dana's first trial were recordings of jailhouse phone calls she had with her sister, Shirley, while awaiting trial. In one call, they discussed the passing of the gas station clerk who had provided that partial, unconfirmed identification of Dana on I-70. Both women noted that the clerk's death was huge for Dana's case. Dana also commented, "The prosecution keeps trying to sneak in what she said because that, little piece of information could potentially put me in Kansas, but that is the only thing. Because they got to at least put me in Kansas, The prosecution in 2012, however, was ultimately unable to definitively place Dana Chandler in Kansas, despite referencing the deceased clerk's earlier tentative ID of her. Since Dana's 2012 conviction, new analysis of cell phone records from 2002 using technology far more advanced than what was available at the time may very well support Dana's "I was in Denver the whole time" alibi after all. In 2002, police had sourced Dana's cell phone records for the weekend of July 6th and 7th. The original investigative report stated that based on these records, Dana's phone received numerous calls over that weekend that went unanswered. The records showed that she did not make or receive any calls from 3:15 p.m. on Saturday the 6th to almost 7:30 p.m. The next day, Sunday the 7th, a period of radio silence that the prosecution argued allowed her to make the trip. However, it seems that cell phone tracking capabilities in the early 2000s were not as precise as they are today, and a new, more sophisticated analysis of those same cell phone tower records, conducted by experts for the defense, may now paint a very different picture, potentially confirming her alibi that she was indeed west of Denver the whole weekend, making the trip to Topeka physically impossible. The lack of any physical evidence directly linking Dana to the crime scene, and the failure to ever recover the murder weapon, also continue to leave gaping holes in the prosecution's original story. Lawyers working pro bono for Dana's legal defense have pushed forward on this front by exploring other potential suspects that they claim were never properly or thoroughly examined by the original investigators. Court documents obtained by a local Topeka newspaper revealed that a judge had found probable cause to issue a search warrant for DNA from a man named Jeff Sutton. Jeff Sutton is the son-in-law of victim Karen Harkness, married to her daughter Erin. Jeff Sutton, according to the Topeka Capital Journal, has a documented history of anger-fueled crimes, financial issues, and it was even suspected at one point that he had possession of a 9mm Uzi-style weapon, similar in caliber to the one used in the murders that July weekend in 2002. Jeff Sutton was a lawyer and a former Waubonsee County attorney. He reportedly worked in that office until January 1997. Before leaving that position, he allegedly arranged a deal with the county sheriff to receive 2 firearms that had been forfeited in previous criminal cases as a form of payment for his services. These 2 guns were then allegedly transferred to his office, but were not noted in the formal inventory. This explosive claim was according to 3 witnesses and law enforcement who worked there at the time, although all 3 now reportedly deny their original statements. An extensive dossier on Jeff Sutton's past and his potential as a suspect was compiled in the years prior to Dana's first trial and was reportedly handed over to authorities in both 2009 and 2012, but apparently never fully pursued. Jeff and Erin Sutton lived about an hour away from the murder scene at the time it took place. Erin Sutton stated that she and Jeff went with friends to a comedy club on the night her mother, Karen, was killed, and that the couple was in bed at the time of the shootings. Having married Karen's daughter just 9 months before the murders, Jeff Sutton is said to have benefited financially from the inheritance his wife received. Dana Chandler's retrial date, as mentioned in the original source, was set for August 2022. Although she had accepted the assistance of legal counsel from the Miracle of Innocence project, she had reportedly decided to represent herself from that point onwards. The stories from those who knew her prior to this horrific crime taking place often paint a picture of an awful, unbalanced woman, and perhaps an uncaring mother. The question before the court this summer, as the original narrator posed, will be, can it be proved, once again, beyond a reasonable doubt, that she is also a murderer, or will new evidence, and a trial free from prosecutorial misconduct, finally clear her name after all these years? Thank you for joining me on Crime Line. The case of Dana Chandler is a stark reminder of the devastating impact of violent crime, the complexities of circumstantial evidence, and the critical importance of a fair and just legal process for all involved. We will continue to follow this case for any new developments from the retrial. Until next time, remember that the pursuit of truth can be a long and winding road.